Hi. So in the last video, we talked about the program development process, how we start out with a text editor, a file that we write, and then it gets executed. So we talked about how we start by writing our source code. We write our source code in a text editor. Now, we're not going to be using a text editor like Notepad. We're going to be using a text editor like NetBeans, which I said before is called an IDE, an integrated development environment. It makes things easier for you as a developer. So when I was in NetBeans, I had a Java file. Now, I didn't have to create the Java file myself. NetBeans created it for me when I created the project. And so this is my source code. We said we write our source code. Once we feel like we're comfortable with it, we want to compile it. So when we were using NetBeans, what I told you to do is just click on that green arrow and it will run the project. So this green arrow actually has two tasks. It has the task of the compiler, just like the javac command that we saw when we ran from command line. And it has the second task of actually executing the program. So what if I wrote this program and I just want to make sure that it doesn't have any syntax errors, but I don't want to run it? What you can do is click on this little hammer sign. It's building the project. So when we say build project, what NetBeans means is actually try to run the compiler. So here I'm going to run the compiler. I'm going to say clean and build. Clean means delete the old files that have been created, the .class file, and build it. Again, compile it, and it runs and it tells you a bunch of things, and it says at the end, build successful. Now, let's make it not successful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come and I'm going to make a small mistake. So I'm going to change this uppercase S to a lowercase s. And the nice thing about NetBeans is that you really don't need to run the compiler to discover all your mistakes. Immediately, NetBeans puts a red wiggly line for me under the word. So it's telling me there is something wrong here. And if I just hover over this error message over here, like the symbol, it says package system does not exist. So it's telling me that it does not understand what system is. It says I can't find system. It doesn't exist because the word is not system, lowercase, it's system with an uppercase. Now, another mistake I could do, like we did when we ran from Notepad, was remove the semicolon. And immediately I see a red wiggly line again, and here the error message, when I hover over it says semicolon expected. So it's trying to help me. But let's say I'm ignoring this message and I want to run the compiler. So I'm going to run and I'm going to click on the hammer sign. And it ran the compiler. So here, do you see where it's compiling? So it's compiling, it's running the compiler. And it's telling me at this line, I found one error. And there is more details if you want to read, like, semicolon expected. So here, if you just want to run the compiler from NetBeans, only the compiler without actually running the code, you can click on this hammer to build the project. Building the project means the compiler. Now, after I run the compiler, I can just run the project once everything is good. So NetBeans has this feature. You just click the arrow and it will run the compiler. It will compile the code, make sure that there are no syntax errors, and then it will execute the program. Now here, if I have like a typo in println, like, let's say I forgot the N, this is a syntax error. It will prevent this program from getting compiled, okay? But if I have like, instead of like the word this with an S, I forgot to put the S in there. This is a message. This is an error message. This is an error that I just made in the spelling. Now the compiler has no idea what I'm trying to print. This is an error. It's a human error. The compiler will not be able to detect that. So the compiler is only able to detect syntax errors, kind of like punctuation errors. If I forget to put this curly brace, that is a problem. If I forget to put a parenthesis, close the parenthesis, that is a problem. So these kinds of errors are called syntax errors. But if you write a program that is, instead of, trying to add two numbers, it multiplies the two numbers, there is no way the compiler will be able to detect that. So the errors that the compiler will be detecting are syntax errors. So when we talk about syntax errors, they are mistakes that the programmer has made, like you, the programmer, that violate the rules of the programming language. The programming language says Here you need to have a parenthesis. Here you need to have a semicolon. Here you need to have a dot or a period. Those are the error messages that the compiler will be able to detect. Those are called syntax errors. Now, once the syntax errors are fixed by you, the programmer, the compiler will generate a bytecode, a .class file. So I just want to go to where I created my project. So I decided to put all my projects on the desktop in a folder called Java 1 Projects. And so here you see that a folder called Hello World was created when I created my project in NetBeans. Now there's a bunch of folders in there. The source folder, SRC, is the one that contains the .java file. So this is the Java file that NetBeans created for me, empty, and I was filling it. The other thing that I want you to notice is the dist folder, the build folder. And the build folder has a folder called classes, and inside classes, there is the hello world.class file. Okay, so this is the actual file that gets created when we try running the compiler. So I'm just going to delete it, and I'm going to go back to my NetBeans, and I'm going to run the compiler again. So I'm going to say build my project. And when I go back, I see that class file just got recreated for me. So this is the class file that gets generated by the compiler. Now this is the class file that gets run when we want to execute the program. So how does the program actually get run? So there's something called the Java Virtual Machine. And it stands for JVM, and I'm just going to go to the next slide for a second. Now, I want you to think back to when you're trying to install a program. So let's say you buy a new game, or you want to install Microsoft Office or some program on your computer. When you go to download or buy a CD, they're going to ask you, do you have a Windows machine or do you have a Mac machine? And if you have a Windows machine, the extension to the file that you usually install is called .exe. It has a .exe extension at the end. If you have a Mac machine, you're going to have a different extension. So if we go to our downloads file folder on Blackboard, you will see that I have different JDKs for you. And JDK stands for Java Development Kit. So this Java Development Kit contains the compiler, and it also contains the Java Virtual Machine to run the program. So what we are asking you to install is a development kit that contains the Java compiler, so you can compile code, and it also contains the virtual machine that will be running the code. And notice here that I said, if you have a Windows machine, I want you to add a .exe to the end. But if you have a Mac machine, I want you to add a DMG. So when they are creating, whoever is creating those files for JDK or NetBeans or Microsoft Word or a game, they have to create a different file for a person who's running Windows and another file that's different for a person who's running a Mac machine. Now, Java is different. Java will always create a .class file. So no matter who is running this program, they will always get a .class file. Now, who is responsible for understanding this .class file? The JVM. So when we run our compiler, we're going to get the bytecode, which is the .class file. Now, when you were installing Java on your computer, you had to install a different version. Mac people had to install the .dmg version. Windows people had to install the .exe version. So when you're installing the Java interpreter or the Java virtual machine, you are installing one that is specific. But the person who's providing you with Java code, it doesn't matter what machine they were developing their code on. They could have developed it on a Linux machine, they could have developed it on a Mac, on a Windows, any machine. As long as they give you a .class file, you will be able to run it. This class file will run on any machine that has the JVM. And this is what we meant by cross-platform in the first video. When we said Java is a cross-platform language, it means that when you create a .class file and generate a .class file from your compiler, this .class file can run on anything, on any machine, as long as it has the Java virtual machine installed on it, of course. And so when you go to install the JDKs, when you went to install it, there are two things that you can find. There's the Java runtime environment, and there's the Java development kit. Now, because we are developing code, we installed the Java development kit, the JDK. Now, on your computer, usually it will come with a JRE already installed, and the Java runtime environment is what allows you to run programs. So if you write a program and you want to give it to someone to, to run this code that you wrote, they really don't need to install the JDK. That's for you to develop code and compile and generate the .class file. All they have to have is the JRE, the Java runtime environment. And there are different versions, of like the standard version, the enterprise version, the micro version. We just installed the standard version. Enterprise has more features for companies. If you wanted to download it from the web, they're available at java.oracle.com. For me, to make things simpler for you, I just put them here on Blackboard, so you don't have to worry about going to the Oracle website. So in the next video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through how to write a program and submit it for the classwork.